Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Tuesday at 10:52, so I hope everyone's doing good. Had a couple days where I wasn't able to upload the videos. Had some internet problems one day. Surprise, surprise, with my connection here because we had so much rain and it was stormy weather and it causes things to descend into chaos pretty quickly here sometimes with the internet connection. So I had a couple other things going on in the morning. But I uploaded yesterday a big show on getting a chance to see Eraserhead on the big screen, and that was pretty amazing. Definitely a a memory for me now from now on. That was definitely a highlight of a film, a classic film. Getting to see it in all its pristine glory. I got to see it at the Waldorf Theater this past weekend. That was really awesome. I just uploaded the video, so thanks for people who have been liking the video and commenting. So yeah, so and now the weather has been really amazingly well. It's been just spectacular, and it feels like it's actually springtime. So it's nice to see the sun and to see the blue skies again. But anyway, it's always you know, a good time to watch movies and to always talk about movies. So what I've been doing is I've been knee deep. I've been watching a shit ton of westerns, and I'm gonna finish this whole collection of all these old school westerns that I got about a month ago. Got this for free through someone who just randomly dropped off a bunch of DVDs at my parents' house about a month ago. No idea who it was or what the reasoning was. It was just dropped off at my parents' house, and there was a lot of crap in the box, but I got some good movies, and this was one. I did a show on a Robert De Niro film a few weeks ago. Uh, this really low budget exploitation movie he did that's really awesome, and I put that up. And then the other movie that I got was this, and this is actually a big collection. It's 20 great westerns. I mean, it's kind of a cheesy generic thing here on the cover, but these movies are actually really awesome. And I just finished the first disc. There's four DVDs in here, so I have three more to go. Super fun. So I've been watching a shit ton of westerns, and all of these. I'm a huge fan of the genre. I particularly love huge Clint Eastwood fan and huge Sergio Leone fan, big spaghetti western fan. But I love John Ford films as well, and I've been wanting to take a deep dive in the more um, kind of exploitation world when it comes to westerns. There's a shit ton of Italian westerns. There's been a couple of really great exploitation western films included in here, which has been a whole lot of fun. And I have two more movies to cover on the first disc, but I'm going to be starting the second disc. Powder Keg was one that was a really great kind of Western exploitation movie, and Boot Hill was really, really awesome. That's definitely like super low down, super raw kind of Italian Western. Very, very cool. And again, it's a genre that I really love, but I don't have a shit ton of Italian, a lot of westerns that came out in the 70s and even 60s. I don't have a lot of them. I do have quite a few Sergio Leone films and a few other ones, but that's one of the things that I love so much about the exploitation world is that there's so many genres, that kind of fit under that label. So that's a style that I kind of been wanting to explore more and more. And the last two movies that I saw were they're very very old. Today's show is on a really early John Wayne film, which I had never seen, which was actually really great. But I'm hoping that because there's so many movies on this in this collection, I'm hoping there'll be some more kind of more exploitation versions of westerns because that's kind of my jam. Um, and I think there will be because there's a bunch of films with John Wayne, Charles Bronson, legend, Lee Van Cleef, another legend, and of course Jack Palance, another legend. So these guys made a lot of really low budget westerns during their time in the 60s, 70s. So and and I think they made a few in the 80s, but super excited to start the second disc tonight. So today's show is on a John Wayne film I had never seen before. This is a wicked old school movie, Winds of the Wasteland from 1936. Pretty wild. Starring John Wayne. Really great cast in this film. John Wayne, Douglas Cosgrove, who I also I'm pretty familiar with. He was in a lot of early American westerns. Phyllis Frazier and Lane Chandler. This was it was directed by Mark V. Wright, and this film is pretty interesting because when you think of like the timeline or like I don't know, kind of the historical context, this was definitely probably one of the earliest westerns that was put out. John Wayne is wicked young in this. I'm not sure how old he is. I mean, this was I think quite a few years before he started working with John Ford, the famous iconic American director. And when you think of the timeline, like this was like, maybe 30, 40 years after the Western time when, there was, essentially when the white man came over and destroyed and killed everything in its path. So it's interesting to see, or watching this movie in that context and just historically where you think, probably, obviously when this movie was made, historically this thing was still, the context of making a Western was something just based on events, 20 or 30 years earlier or prior. It's pretty wild when you think of that. And I had never seen this movie before. And basically, the movie is about the Pony Express, how the settlers and the United States basically put communication lines, wires across the country to establish communications. The first early forms of communications across the country. Pretty interesting time period, and it's about these cowboys, kind of basically going through this process of laying cable, and all of the things that they would, encounter, and all the trials and tribulations. And this movie's really great. It's got some great action. There's some really great chase scenes and fight scenes, particularly involving horses. When you think of some of these sequences, when I was watching this film, considering it's from like 1936, and some of the complex kind of action sequences, it's kind of jaw dropping to think of how they pulled off a lot of these things. Using stunt doubles and stunt men, and it looks, that part of the film still really holds up. The editing, the action itself is actually really good. This movie also has, kind of comedic elements. It's a little bit of a drama. It's got some great action in it, and it's kind of an interesting part of history. In regards to, the Pony Express, if you will. It still holds up. The quality of this movie on DVD is decent. These are all, this whole collection's they're all DVD movies or versions, but they're not like really great. It seems like they are just kind of burnt versions like a copy of a copy of a copy. So the quality is not really good, but some of these movies I would definitely love to see on Blu-ray. I'm sure it would be amazing, and you'd really see the the clarity of the picture, and the sound would be, I'm sure, fantastic. But yeah, I mean, historically, it's again that's one of the things that got me really interested in watching this, and then also doing shows on where I'm going to be covering a shit ton of westerns because I'm a huge fan of the genre. So I grew up watching, mainly through my parents and my dad, especially growing up watching westerns, John Ford films, and especially Clint Eastwood films. I remember I have a distinct memory that my dad was more of a fan of the American films. He did not really like the Italian versions. He didn't like the lower budget versions of the Western style. But I love that style. This is definitely more of a traditional American film at that time. Considering this film came out in '36, it feels like this movie was a they put a this was for that time period definitely a big kind of Hollywood production, and of course starring John Wayne, who became a an American icon in cinema. Huge John Wayne fan, and so it's interesting when I get into his style or take a deep dive. Like it could be anything from like action movies to horror films or giallo films. I like to take a deep dive and trace kind of the origins of where a lot of these films kind of started or came from or previous influences because it's a massive massive genre, so of course there's always some degree that where there's going to be a starting point of where a lot of these things started, and where a movie or a series of movies kind of laid down the foundation for that tradition in a film, with the certain kinds of tropes that we expect, in that specific genre, and or a film that sets the bar really high. So it's always interesting you know tracing this back to the origins of what was to become kind of the blueprint of westerns, and really really cool. So yeah, I definitely recommend it. It's a little bit, well, it's kind of funny saying it, but it's obviously a little bit dated, 1936. I find that, in my experience at least, watching westerns, like I find that watching, if I watch, well, John Ford movies and a lot of the Italian Sergio Leone films, and especially, like movies like High Plains Drifter, one of my favorite westerns, directed by Clint Eastwood. Movies like that where, to me, they're not really dated at all. They have this quality about them that just lasts forever. They and the films that came out before, I think this film has a dated quality to it. That's a little bit, I don't know, maybe a little bit hard to get into because it does have because of the time period, the time frame, the way people deliver dialogue, people's behavior was very very different. The way the dialogue was acted or delivered, certain kinds of mannerisms and that time period was obviously very very different. So sometimes it doesn't lend itself to something that you could, I don't know, maybe that doesn't hold up. But I think there are certain qualities of this movie that, because of that, it might not hold up. It's a little bit dated in a way that maybe hinders the film. But overall, it's a great movie. I was really entertained. It had it was very exciting. It was a good story. Some great cast. Some really great action. So very cool. And looking at this thing like I do is looking at it in a timeline like in a more kind of historical perspective. It's very interesting seeing how these things get traced back, because I do that a lot with genre. So that's kind of what I've been doing with these films, because when I first came across this DVD collection, obviously I looked at the titles and the movies, and I was really surprised by. I'm sure there's going to be some films in this collection that I've probably have seen, but so far, none of these movies that I've watched, the first five movies, are movies I've never seen them before. So that was a really nice surprise. But then when I got the DVD, the collection, I looked at, obviously I looked at the titles, but the years of some of these films they're in the 20. Some of them, I think there's one or two that were in the late 20s, but most of them are in the 30s. And then most, I think, well, I should say some films in the 30s, but most of the films are from the 70s. So really cool, really really cool, and I've been digging all of these movies a lot. So yeah, stay tuned for the next show, and take care and have a great day. Peace.